It happens a lot these days. It happens a lot these days. People are here and then they leave and you find out what happened to them. And you never find out what happened to them. There's a lot about this work that is very sad. Sometimes it is hard to measure any kind of improvement in the kids. It is hard to know if we are really achieving anything. I've sometimes thought about giving it all up because I need to spend more time on my studies. My family is also poor, and so I need to earn money to buy supplies for school. But I also wonder what would happen to these children if I and other younger people didn't do this work. Most psychologists and sociologists don't want to come to Apartao to work because they say it's too dangerous. It is too dangerous. I was born in Monteria, a large town about 90 miles east of Apartao. My father had a small shop where he sold household goods and fixed motorbikes. We never had much money. My father often came home drunk and got into fights with mother and cursed and sometimes whipped me. When I was 9, he left us and I never saw him much after that. A few years later, he was murdered during a robbery. I was angry with him for abandoning us, but his death meant I lost him forever. I still miss him. We never had no he had no money after my father left, so my mother began selling our household goods and furniture to buy food. Then she started selling her clothes. One day she told me she had to leave for a while so that we could make a new start somewhere else. She wanted me to stay in the house of Monteria. My mother promised to send me money and to telephone me every week, and then she left. I was 10 years old and nearly a year I lived entirely alone. For nearly a year I lived entirely alone. I miss my mother desperately. I cried hard whenever I saw a photograph of her or some of her clothes. I had to learn how to cook for myself, standing on a chair because I didn't reach the stove. I washed my own clothes by hand. I washed my own hands, my, oh my god. I washed my own clothes by hand and cleaned the house. I decided that if I was very good, I decided that if I was very good, took care of the house, and studied hard at school, my mother might come back. She called every week, but she always asked me to wait a bit longer. I knew she had good reasons for being away, but I was miserable. I never told anyone I was alone, not even my friends or my teachers. I was afraid that if anyone knew robbers would come and my mother would never return. She left me in February 1995 and came back the following December. I couldn't believe it. When she walked through the door, I held I held onto her, touching and hugging her. She had been thin when she went away, but she came back quite plump. She told me that we were going to live on a banana plantation near Apartao. She had a job selling meals to the workers, and she was living with a man who would become my stepfather. The tiny house that my mother took me was unlike any other place I had ever lived. Monteria was noisy and crowded. There was always people out on the streets, music blasting from bars, people selling anything and everything on the sidewalks, but the plantation was quiet and slow by day. Nothing ever happened there, and I wasn't used to the sounds of the countryside by night. I heard that armed groups sometimes came to farms like that and abducted children who were then forced to become soldiers. I'd heard of massacres of farm workers and of oh my god, I've heard of massacres of farm workers, and I suffered from recurring nightmares in which an armed group appeared on the farm, dragged us out of our house and killed us all. It was also strange to be living so closely with mother and this man. He wasn't bad to me, but I felt like an intruder. I realized that even though I had missed my mother, I had almost become I had almost become used to being alone. After only a few weeks, my mother explained to me that I would have to leave. It was for my own good, she said, because I needed to go to a decent school. She had arranged for me to live with my cousin in Apartado and to enter the ninth grade at the Jose Celestino Miches secondary school. I didn't complain. Apartado wasn't as big as Monteria, but at least it was a town. Looking back, I know that even though I suffered when I was left alone, it also forced me to grow up quickly. Now I was determined to do well, study hard, and get ahead. Soon after entering the school, I was elected to represent my class in the student movement. A couple of months later, in April 1996, Gracia Machel came to Apartado. That visit transformed a lot of our lives because it put Apartado on the map as a place where young people were really trying to do something to make peace. We went into schools and taught other kids about their rights and why we should all vote in the children's mandate. Really big changes began happening for me in 1997 when I was 13 years old and the Return of the Happiness program started. By that time, my God, I was 13 and the Return of the Happiness program started. By that time, many displaced families were turning up in Apartado, Turbo, and the other towns in the region. Every day, we would see them arrive on donkey carts, in trucks, and in buses, or on foot. They were old people, babies, young children, pregnant women. Many were wounded, emotionally, if not physically, and stunned from what happened to them. All they had left were the things that they were carrying. They had been driving from their homes by the struggle between the armed groups who were competing for control of the land. These groups used to be the most vicious methods to force people to leave. They didn't care what happened to the children or what they saw. They would even kill their parents in front of the children and then leave the children with the bodies. Most of the displaced moved in with their relatives, rented small rooms, and constructed their own shelters. In a few places, especially camps were oh my god. In a few places, special camps were set up. The Municipio Sports Center in Turbo, a town about 25 miles away from Apartado, was transformed into a massive dormitory for about 400 people. A return to happiness volunteers As a return to happiness, volunteers were given training, supplies, and T-shirts identifying us as a part of the program. The demand for the workshops was huge. I recruited a dozen other volunteers from Celestino School, helped in helped in their training, and then organized the workshops that we ran in La Chinita and elsewhere. During 1997, 1998, our group worked with more than 1,000 children, and we were always getting requests to do more. Even if it was hard, working in that program gave us something constructive to do in a situation where we could otherwise feel quite hopeless. Also, trying to understand the difficulties of these children helped me understand that my own problems. It's helped me understand my own problems. I had always found it hard to talk about what had happened to me when my mother left and when my father was murdered. But listening to the other kids helped me to open up. By the time I began volunteering in the Return of Happiness program, I was living in a barrio known as Primero de Mayo, 1st of May, because that was the day on which squatters had invaded and seized the land. My mother and stepfather had been among them, and together we had built a small wooden house. Although I lived in Primer de Mayo, I had chosen to run the workshops in La Chinita because that was where many displaced children were living. But Apartado was a deeply divided town. Different bodies were often associated with support for particular armed groups. People were sometimes suspicious of those who came from other barrios. It didn't make sense to it didn't make sense to some that we could oh my god it didn't make sense to some that we would do this work just to help children, any children.